Welcome to The Authority File, the podcast where you'll hear conversations with academic librarians, technologists, researchers, and authors whose work is laying the foundation for higher education's future. I'm Bill Mickey, your host and the editorial director at Choice. In this four-part series, which is brought to you with support from Wilfrid Laurier University Press, my guests and I have an extremely fun conversation about research. Now, you might ask, what's so fun about talking about research? That's a good question, so tune into the next 4 episodes and find out. But I'll give you some hints, starting with our guests. Joining me are Beth Driscoll, Associate Professor of Publishing and Communications at the University of Melbourne, and Claire Squires, Professor of Publishing Studies at the University of Stirling. Claire and Beth are co-authors of a self-published novella called The Frankfurt Kabuff, a comic erotic thriller about the book publishing industry with the Frankfurt Book Fair serving as the setting. Now, out from Wilfrid Laurier University Press as a critical edition, it includes an introduction, annotated text, and 15 contributed essays. The book is actually a research project, the culmination of years of fieldwork that employs a host of artistic and creative approaches aimed at upending traditional scholarly workflows that result, in this case, as an examination of the power dynamics and creative economies of book publishing. But our conversation goes way beyond the book industry, focusing on the intersection of scholarly publishing, creativity, and yes, fun, to explore how a more disruptive approach can result in serious scholarship. In this second episode of our 4-part series, we discuss how exactly creative disruption can advance certain aspects of scholarly publishing. Okay, so Beth, you mentioned Olapulism in the previous episode, and I'd like to ask. I have a lot of questions for you both about that. Can you describe the concept and sort of its origin story? Was this concept had you both developed this before the book? And then, what does it really generally reveal about your thoughts on the scholarly workflow in your fields?
Oh, so many questions.
I know.
Should we go with the main description or just how it came about? What do you want to do, Beth?
Maybe I'll tell the little story of how we began with Olapulism, and then you can tackle the big conceptual questions.
Thanks.
Yeah, anytime. So Claire and I knew each other through conferences, especially the Society for the History of Authorship, Reading and Publishing, and we knew that we were interested in the same areas, but we hadn't really connected until one fateful May when I went to visit Claire, and she'd arranged for us to go on a trip to the Ullapool Book Festival, and that trip required us taking a road trip in a car and spending hours and hours in the car together, where we bounced ideas off one another and discovered a lot more shared interests. We had an amazing time at the festival, and then afterwards decided that we wanted to write about it, but not in a quote-unquote normal way. We realised, I think, that we were both we didn't want to just keep doing case studies of different festivals until we died, I think was one of the ways we put it. And it's like, well, if we're going to work together, let's make it special, let's make it creative, and let's use unusual formats and ways of thinking to try and do something that's, new and energizing for both of us.
Yeah, and so what we specifically did at that moment is we came up with, I think I drew a map of Ullapool, the town, and we thought, goodness, that looks a little bit like a board game. So we came up with this concept of creating a set of board and card games based on book festivals, not because we were particularly interested in gamification. It's not about that. It's more about the game-inspired thinking. I think in our first article, we talked about it as, so thinking about how you could bring a number of different kind of creative approaches to kind of really have fun, but also to play with quite serious ideas about power and place and hierarchy and constructions of value. But doing that through a really kind of a sort of making and doing way. So Ullapulism, obviously named after the town Ullapool, in case you're wondering specifically, as Beth described, it was kind of in that place that we started to build that kind of relationship and conceptual school, as we now call it. So really, it's a scholarly approach which is creative and critical, playful, kind of uses quite a different number of writing modes. And certainly with the Frankfurt Kabuff, you can see that as a kind of continuation of here's a step into fiction, for example. Here's a step into self-publishing. So a lot of experimentation as well in terms of formats and platforms and approaches.
Excellent. So were you consciously utilizing the concept of Olapulism as you wrote the Frankfurt Kabuff, or like was
Oh,
that part of the
definitely.
plan? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, so when we're in our Ullapoolist mode, we are arts informed, we're playful, we're interested in satire. One of our manifesto items is forced sociality, which just means, I don't know, bringing people together in interesting, sometimes slightly awkward ways. And self-publishing on Wattpad was a perfect example of that, and inviting people to comment on the work as we were writing it.
Mm-hmm.
And activism too, because we had something to say about the state of the world and the industry, and we were doing that through our creative methods.
Right. Yeah. You mentioned the manifesto, and you've since, or a ways back, literally wrote a manifesto to kind of articulate the idea of Olapulism, and we'll get into that as well. But we've spoken on this podcast with several scholars who have written works that use a combination of creative expression and straightforward academic prose. I'm wondering, I'm going to ask you a similar question, and is how do you think this combination allows for new perspectives into developing and publishing research? And Claire, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. I think it's a really good question, because it's not like we're the first academics to use creative writing. There's an established set of scholarship there, not solely creative writers working in the academy, but kind of using imaginative modes. I suppose for us, thinking what that brought, it was kind of a little of what we talked about before. So perhaps intensifying some of those moments, being that we observed, and might have been harder even in the kind of slightly abnormal academic writing that we do. But I think it's also that possibility of imagining otherwise. And that's obviously one of the things fiction is so great at. It allows you to have utopian and dystopian thinking, very, very at its most extreme. That's not what every single work of fiction does all of the time. But I think, in some ways as academics, we are supposed to be measured and objective. And I'm sure we both contest that that's what academics really should be doing. But I think it's an intensification of that process of thinking, where's the I, where's the we in scholarship? And I think fiction really allows you to play with that idea. And I think that's particularly important for people from groupings which might not be always fully represented or are working within some kind of hierarchy, to allow, kind of different voices to come forth in different ways.
Yeah, excellent.
Yeah, and I guess what I would add to that is, I was just thinking as you were talking, Claire, in a way, we don't just do creative writing and academic writing. We do a whole variety of different kinds of writing, some pieces for media outlets or for literary journals. And I think we really value experimenting with different lengths and formats and styles and the different audiences you can reach, but also the different way that you put together ideas if you're writing fast or if you're writing slow. And I think we believe that both are valuable, or all are valuable. We joke about going, quick, slow, then slow. And I think it's that oscillation between modes that perhaps unlocks some fresh perspectives.
Yeah. So a good portion of the Olapulism concept is disruption, and I'm wondering, how a disruptive approach uncovers new opportunities for research in your areas. And Beth, you were kind of hinting at that just now. And how does sort of instability, I guess, help advance the field?
Well, I do have an example. I was thinking about this. Um, a concept that's quite useful to scholars in our area is the idea of the big book. And what is it when the whole industry gets behind a particular book and it becomes a big book? But the established academic patterns mean that people reach for the same citation all the time if they want to explain what a big book is. And it'll be a book by someone eminent, publishing with a very eminent university press. And Claire and I, just in May, wrote a song together that we called Big Books, Small Snacks, which we have uploaded as a lyric video to YouTube. There's a quite lengthy rap in the middle. And we put that out into the world for people to use as an alternative citation to the established academic reference point for what a big book is. And so that was a playful gesture. But we did actually use the song to think through some of the different dynamics between what it means to be a bestseller. Like there's a story that gets told about a bestseller that it moves from being, a small town book to suddenly making it big on the streets of New York, and it's all very heartwarming. But then in the rap, we explored some of that darker side about the winner takes all logic of the industry and how sometimes competition can be a bit ruthless. So that song format, I think, let a few different ideas come through.
Right. Excellent. And then there's also very political and social aspects of volatilism. What are the perspectives and norms that are being shaken up within that?
Yeah, definitely. We've already talked a little bit about some of the political things that we've been examining, and Beth mentioned a moment ago about one of our manifesto items being forced sociality. And I think there's just thinking through that example that Beth talked about just there, we did with another friend and scholar as well, who came up with some armography, TikTok style, for this, introduced it at a symposium and made everyone join in with us, which is, possibly a little bit awkward in some ways. And we kind of worked through that awkwardness. Right, they loved it. Everyone was joining in. We did not make anybody. There was no forcing. Everyone enjoyed themselves. They had the lyrics. And I think there's something about, it's interesting because I think we do things like this in our teaching all of the time if we're active and engaged teachers. But I think sometimes the ways in which we convey our research to each other as scholars lack some of that freshness and bounce. And I think actually thinking about, all of the different parts of the social that we might engage with, actually kind of taking different approaches, creative approaches, disruptive approaches, kind of really helps us with that.
Excellent.
Yeah, and breaks down some of the, maybe the reverence and the quite linear model of scholarship where you write an article that quotes the article before yours and everything proceeds in a quite sometimes rigid way, and turning that instead into a literal song and dance that everyone joins in on helps people think, there are different ways of creating knowledge together and different ways of understanding the world and different ways of working together.
Yep, exactly. You just heard from Beth Driscoll, Associate Professor of Publishing and Communications at the University of Melbourne, and Claire Squires, Professor of Publishing Studies at the University of Stirling. Beth and Claire are co-authors of a novella called The Frankfurt Kabuff. This series is brought to you with support from Wilfrid Laurier University Press. Join us next week when my guests and I discuss their manifesto. Of course there's a manifesto, which helps guide their arts-informed research. As always, underwriting opportunities for the Authority File podcast are directed by Choice's advertising manager, Pam Marino, and all of our episodes are produced and edited by Choice's digital media producer, Sabrina Kofer, with support from digital media assistant, Ashley Roy. That's all for this week. Thanks for joining us.